did you get a handout? Did you get a handout? Don't skip. Skippering is the title of that handout. Now, people have asked about the joke cards that I mentioned. It was just a comment, and that comment has caused people to ask, where did you get those? What are those joke cards? So I'm going to throw some of them up here. This is the last set that I sent to the grandkids. Susan found these somewhere. She bought these joke cards because she thought this would be a good way for me to connect with the grandkids and to send them something that they might enjoy. So this was a joke card I sent to Brooklyn. What did the pig say when he was in the sun? I'm bacon. And then I wrote on the back of it, hi, Brooklyn, what do we call bacon? Do you remember? We call it dead pig. Now, I don't know why I started doing that, but I always enjoy hearing you call it that. Have a wonderful day. Love, Papa. So somewhere we just started calling it dead pig. Well, she lives at the Wilds, and they have some of their meals together down in the dining hall with the staff, and she was down there with the staff, and it's all the Wild staff sitting around, and just so happened the cook on this night decided it was going to be bacon and eggs. And when the food came out and Brooklyn saw the bacon, she says, oh, goody, dead pig. Well, everybody cracks up laughing about it, and I don't know if it embarrassed her, but that's what she calls it because that's what I've called it. And here's another one. This is one that I sent to Canaan. What button can't be unbuttoned? A belly button. So I asked Canaan to ask her mother, did Adam and Eve have belly buttons? And I said, would you give me a Marco Polo and let me know what your mommy's answer is? And then here's a third one. This one went to Oliver. What do you call cheese that's not yours? Nacho cheese. It took me a long time before I finally got that one, but I wrote Oliver, if you can figure out the joke, I need help understanding it. Maybe you can give me a call and help me. So it's just a simple way to connect with the grandkids. It's important to connect. Now, tonight's devotional, I am calling Don't Skip Skippering. A skipper is a captain of a ship or boat, and it comes from the German word skip, S-C-H-I-P. I don't know how that's pronounced. I don't speak German, but the meaning of that is ship, and the skipper is the one that controls a ship. So here's where we're going to go tonight in this devotional. A grandfather and a grandmother continue to provide leadership and direction even though their roles change from parent to grandparent. You're not parenting, you're grandparenting. The skipper is still skippering. Just because your kids are grown and have their own kids doesn't mean that leadership doesn't fall our lot right now. How important is good skippering? Let me give you the tale of two ships. The Bunkerhead versus the Berganya. Under the command of Captain Robert Salmon, the HMS Bunkerhead left Portsmouth on January 1852, taking troops to fight in the frontier war in South Africa. The Bunkerhead, one of the first iron-hulled paddle steamers in service, traveled to southern Ireland before heading for the Cape on the 17th of January. Aboard were an assortment of British Army regiments called Tommies, horses, military supplies, and some family. After taking on fresh water and supplies, the Bunkerhead steamed out of Simon's Bay near Cape Town in the late afternoon of February 26th with about 634 men, women, and children on board. The weather conditions perfect, a clear blue sky, and a flat and calm sea. The Bunkerhead continued steadily on her passage. And there's a picture of the Bunkerhead with the paddle wheels on each side, powered by steam. Captain Salmon, whose family had served in the Royal Navy since the reign of Elizabeth I, had received orders to use all possible haste to reach his destination in Algoa Bay. So let's take the next picture. And this is the bottom of the continent of Africa. His ship came down to Simon's Bay, and now it's going to leave Simon's Bay, and it's wrapping around Danger Point on its way to that red dot, Alcoa Bay, where he was going to let the troops off. In order to speed up the trip, he decided to hug the South African coastline as closely as possible. This course kept the Birkenhead within 3 miles of the coast, maintaining a speed of 8 knots. It was in the early hours of February 26th, approaching a rocky outcrop called Danger Point, some 112 miles from Cape Town, that disaster struck. With the exception of the watchman, everyone was fast asleep in their quarters. The watch was scanning the clear, glowing waters ahead, and the leadman had just called, sounding 12 fathoms, when the Birkenhead rammed an uncharted rock. The Birkenhead's churning paddle wheels drove her on with such force that the rock sliced through into the hull, ripping open a compartment between the engine room and the forepeak. Water flooded into the forward compartment of the lower troop deck, filling it instantly. Hundreds of soldiers were trapped and drowned in their sleeping quarters. All the surviving officers and men who could assembled on deck. Some of the soldiers stood barefoot, dressed only in their nightclothes, and many stood with injury sustained as they clawed their way from the flooded troop quarters. The senior officer on board, Lieutenant Colonel Seaton, took charge of all military personnel. He immediately summoned the officers around him and stressed the importance of maintaining order and discipline among the inexperienced soldiers. Distress rockets were fired, but there was no help at hand. Realizing the hopeless situation they were in, the captain ordered the lifeboats to be lowered. Much of the lowering equipment would not function due to lack of maintenance and a thick layer of paint that clogged the mechanisms. That night, under a clear, starry sky, the great naval tradition of women and children first was established. As eventually 2 cutters and a gig were launched, and 7 women and 13 children were rowed away from the wreck safely. The horses were cut loose and jumped overboard. Only then did Captain Salmon shout to the men that everyone who could swim must save themselves by jumping into the sea to make for the boats. Lieutenant Colonel Seaton, the soldier's commanding officer, quickly realized that such a rush would mean that the lifeboats would be swamped and the women and children aboard would perish. He drew his sword and ordered his men to stand fast. The untried soldiers did not move, even as the ship split in two and the gallant company slipped down into the waters. The Birkenhead sank in only 25 minutes after she had struck the rocks. Only the topmast and the sailcloth remained visible above the water, with 50 men still clinging to them. The sea was full of men desperate for anything that could float. Death by drowning came quickly to many, but the more unfortunate were taken by the great white sharks, now called Tommy sharks because of the feast on the Tommy soldiers that day. The next morning, the schooner Lioness reached the lifeboats, rescuing all on board, after which she headed for the scene of the disaster, reaching the wreck that afternoon, picking up the remaining survivors. Of the 634 people on board the Birkenhead, only 193 were saved. All of the Birkenhead women and children survived. The incident captured the world's imagination, and King Frederick William of Prussia had the story read aloud to every regiment in his army as an example of supreme discipline, courage, and self-sacrifice. The disaster gave rise to the Bunkerhead Drill. And the Bunkerhead Drill means women and children first. It's the standard procedure during any sinking of a ship. Women and children first. And then there was the Berganya. The Berganya, launched in 1885. The Berganya was a French ocean liner that traveled between France and New York City. It was known for its speed and could cross the Atlantic in less than 8 days and average 17 knots. It was a large ship, 490 feet long, 7,395 tons, and was capable of carrying 1,000 passengers. On July 3rd, 1898, the Berganya left New York City with 725 people on board. The next day, July 4th, at 5 a.m., she was rammed by the Cromartyshire a British sailing vessel, due to heavy fog off the coast of Nova Scotia. Of the 725 people on board, only 70 passengers survived, while 103 of the 220 crew members survived. Most shockingly, only one woman out of 200 and none of the children survived the wreck. The lopsided nature of the survival was due to the horrible way the crew acted. They fought off passengers and took the lifeboats for themselves. There were reports of crew members stabbing passengers in the water and beating them with oars, as reported in the Kansas City Journal, July 7th, 1898. The last few minutes on board the Berganya witnessed some of the most terrible scenes of horror and cruelty that ever blotted the history of a civilized race. Instead of heroic discipline, which so often has been the one bright feature in such awful moments, the crew of the steamer fought like demons for the lifeboats and rafts, battering the helpless passengers away from their only means of salvation, with the result that the strong overcame the weak, and the list of 173 saved contains the name of but one woman. The only woman to survive was Mrs. Lacasse. When asked how she came to be the only woman to survive the wreck, her response was this: "Don't ask why I am the only woman who was saved. Better to ask why my husband was the only man aboard who was man enough to save a woman." So here's a headline carrying the results of the accident: 550 perished, fewer than 200 saved. Down near the bottom mentions passengers were murdered in the sea. The Bunkerhead versus the Berganya. It's a contrast of mariner character. History remembers the Bunkerhead as women and children first. And history remembers the Berganya as women and children last. There is a huge difference that's made by the skipper of the ship. Good skippering is important. Now, on a lighter note, we saw the sitcom in the 1960s about a crew that set sail on a 3-hour tour. And it is called... Most episodes revolve around the feeble attempts or unsuccessful attempts of the crew to get off the island. In the Ballad of Gilligan's Island, it says, just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a faithful trip that started from this tropic port upon this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailing man, the skipper, brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour. The weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed. If not for the courage of the fearless crew, the minnow would be lost. And then it gives you the name or the people that was on the crew. Now in the ballad, they survived because of the leadership of the skipper, who was a brave and sure man. And sea captains really did have to be brave and sure people. The oceans were fraught with dangers to travel across. Dangers that us landlubbers wouldn't really know. Now, we do have one sailor back here. At least that's what Jeff tells me. He's learned how to sail a sailboat. Any other sailors in here other than Jeff? Yeah, us landlubbers. Oh, really? I didn't know. Brother Walford, you were a sailor? Navy. You were Navy, weren't you? Submarine. Under the Sea. That sounds like another song. Stormy seas, tidal waves, shoals littered with sunken vessels, reefs, sudden squalls, savage sharks, and most frightening of all, sinking. The skipper provided leadership, the leadership that was necessary to survive the hazards of sea travel. I want us to think about this when it comes to grandparenting. We are called to be grandparents. Some of us, maybe many of us. We have tasks of grandparenting. We have to skipper the grandchildren that God allows us to enjoy. And here's some things about grandparenting that we should be aware of. Number one in your notes, we provide family security. A grandparent provides family security. A grandparent that sails faithfully forward for Christ provides the security, spiritual security that the parents of your grandchildren need, and certainly your grandchildren need. We can lead them spiritually, and we can talk about God, and we can pray for them and read the scriptures, and we can tell them Bible stories, and they like to hear stories. And we can dramatize those stories. We can tell it in a way that makes our grandchildren sit up and listen when they're little. We can captivate them by the way we tell stories. We can lead them to help people. We can help our grandkids learn how to take a tract and give it to somebody. That's a simple little thing. And they don't have all of the fears that are in the heart of an adult. We can lead them to care for people and make sure that they develop that way. We can make sure that they understand that we are pleased with their spiritual development and that their spiritual development is important to us. We can talk about that to them. We can be a good skipper in their life. Every organization needs a leader. A corporation needs a CEO. An army needs a general. A ball team needs a head coach. A church needs a pastor. An airplane needs a pilot. A boat needs a skipper. A family needs a father and a mother and a grandfather and a grandmother. Now, in your notes, I gave you this question. Does God look for leaders? Absolutely, He does. Noah, when mankind was so evil and God decided that He was going to destroy mankind, the Scripture says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God, Genesis tells us. And God destroyed His creation, mankind, with the exception of Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. And man became wicked again. And God then looked to Abraham. Genesis 18, for I know him. God speaking about Abraham. I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him. And they shall keep the way of the Lord and justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which He has spoken of him. So when God was looking for a leader, He found Abraham and says, okay, that's the guy. I know him. He's going to train his kids after him to worship God. And then there was David. If the people wanted Saul, God had David in mind. And the Lord sought him a man after His own heart. And the Lord had commanded him to be captain over His people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. So he took Saul out and He put David in. And then Hanani was a prophet during the days of King Asa. And Hanani said this, for the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to show Himself strong in behalf of them whose heart is perfect toward Him. God is looking for people whose heart is perfect toward Him. He's looking for leaders. Joshua, choose you this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Here's a leader that was stepping forward spiritually, and he was going to lead his family for God. Moses, when he was a leader, a young man came running one day to Moses, and he told Moses, Eldad and Medad do prophesy in the camp. Joshua heard that, and Joshua says to Moses, my Lord Moses, forbid them. Because Eldad and Medad were over there prophesying on their own, and Moses wasn't over there. Forbid him from doing that. And Moses said, enviest thou for my sake? Would God that all of the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put His Spirit upon them. He was glad that they were prophesying. God chooses people to use those people to lead others. He's looking for leaders. I want us to park for just a few minutes on Ezekiel. Go to Ezekiel 22. I want you to see this. This is really important, why God chooses people. What is he looking for? What does he need? In Ezekiel 22, God has given a prophecy to Ezekiel. Ezekiel has been in exile in Babylon for 6 years, as of this chapter, 6 years. 2.5 years from then, Judah is going to be destroyed as a nation. And Ezekiel has been given prophecy after prophecy about this. Now, in this chapter, we see a corrupt nation. And we see how corrupt people act. And here's an important thing for us to understand. Corrupt people will do corrupt things as much as their power and authority allow them. You think about that. Corrupt people will do corrupt things as much as their power and authority allow them. Those in positions of great authority can do a lot of corruption in a nation. And those with little authority and little power can do a little corruption. In chapter 22, verse 23, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, say unto her, talking about Judah, Thou art the land that is not cleansed, nor rained upon in the day of indignation. And now in verse 25, he starts going to categories of people. In verse 25, there is a conspiracy of her prophets. Verse 26, her priests. Verse 27, her princes. Verse 28, and her prophets. Verse 29, the people of the land. Verse 30, and I sought for a man among them. So you have these categories of people, and they do different things in corrupting the nation as their authority allows them. The prophets have the power to influence people and devour them. They can take material things from the people, and they can even take the lives of some people. And so you know what they did? They did exactly what they had the power to do. They took the lives of some people, and they took material things. They were likened unto ravening wolves preying on the people. Then you get to verse 26, and you have corrupt priests. What do they have the power and authority to do? To corrupt worship. The people looked to them for spiritual guidance. They blurred the lines between clean and unclean. They violate the Sabbath. They profane God's name. That's what they could do. So you know what they did? They did exactly that. They profaned God's name and made a mockery of his Sabbath. They turned the people's hearts away from God. Then you get to verse 27, and you got these princes. They have the power of the law. They have the power of the military as the sons of the king at their disposal. They can prey upon the people, and they can kill the people, and they can cheat the people. And you know what they did? They did that because they had the power to do it. And then he goes back to the prophets in verse 28. They speak lies which God has not spoken. You see, they can stand in front of the people as a prophet in a prophetic office, and they can say, Thus saith the Lord, and tell the people what they say God said to them when God never spoke. And they can corrupt the people. They can deceive them by their lies. So that's what they did. And then you have the people, verse 29. They have now you're out of the more influential categories. Now you're just down to the average Joe on the street. What does the average Joe on the street have the ability to do? They have the power to steal and oppress the poor and the needy and the foreigner, the stranger that comes in and lives in their culture, that doesn't know how the culture operates. They're a little more vulnerable. It's like an immigrant that comes to America from Vietnam, and they land here, and they don't know the laws, they don't know how society operates. They can be taken advantage of because they don't know how it all works. That's the weakness of the foreigner. And just the average Joe on the street, what they did was steal and oppress the poor and the needy and the foreigner. You know why they did that? Because they could do that. They had the ability to do that. They had the power to do that. So that's exactly what they did. All of this behavior is wrong. So now you get to verse 30. Therefore, God looked for a man among the leaders of the nation, a man that had character, a man that had authority, a man that could stem the tide of national destruction, and he found no one. Jeremiah had the character. Jeremiah had the voice. Jeremiah proclaimed destruction is coming, but he didn't have the authority to change the nation in any significant way. He was marginalized as a prophet. He's a prophet in a prophetic office, and every other prophet in the prophetic office marginalized him as somebody that's out of step, out of sync. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And they reduced his influence. And so what happened? Destruction came to the nation. Now, I was a student in Bible college, and a preacher was preaching on Romans chapter 12. I'm going to read it to you, 2 verses. This is what he was preaching about. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So he was talking about we live our life in a way that proves God's good and God's acceptable and God's perfect will. And he said, God needs gap men. God needs gap women. Good and acceptable and perfect. People that live to show that of God, His good and acceptable and perfect will. We need gap men. And then he goes to Isaiah chapter 22, verse 30, where it says, I searched for a man that would stand in the gap. God's looking for gap men. Now, as a Bible college student, I'm thinking, that is so cool. God's looking for gap men, and here in the New Testament, they're good and acceptable and perfect. I think at that point in my Christian life, I was looking for hidden things in the Bible that other people didn't see. And when he pointed that out, I thought, that is so cool. Well, he wasn't altogether wrong in the theology of that. God is looking for people to stand in the gap. People to stand between unholiness and unrighteousness and God's truth, and take God's truth and get it to them. Now, folks, we should be gap grandparents. We should be gap grandparents between our grandchildren and all that God has taught us in our Christian life. And let's stand in this gap and let's feed these grandkids, influence these grandkids in every way we can spiritually. Because the world out there is going to try to corrupt them. They need us to stand in the gap, to give truth from God, things that God has taught us, and we can talk to them and love on them, and we can share stories, and we can make it exciting. We can influence them. We provide that type of leadership for our grandkids. Number 2, provide family history. All of us want to belong. We want to belong. No one likes the feeling of being left out, being left alone. I mean, were you ever one when the guys went out to play ball and you just kind of chose up sides? I'll take John, I'll take Frank, I'll take Larry, I'll take Paul, and he gets down and there's one person standing there and you take him. No, you take him. No, you can have him. I mean, who likes to be the last one there that gets... Nobody likes to be left out. As grandparents, we can provide a history for our grandkids. They belong. They belong in our family. We can provide them with a sense of where we came from and what God did in our lives. Our grandkids need to know that about us. They need to know how God saved us. They need to know what God did in our lives after He saved us. We need to share our history with them. I'm realizing every passing year how important my mom's memories are. Because when she's gone, and she's 90, almost 91, there's going to be a slice of family history that's gone, that she has. So when I'm with her, I try to talk to her about things about the family, try to learn what I can. And it was the same with Susan's family. So one of the things we did in our parents' old age, we did a book, and you've probably done these kind of books too, Snapfish, and you go online and you upload a bunch of pictures and you can print a book. But we wrote in here, actually Susan's brother wrote a tribute to his dad, and 2 pages, and then it was filled with pictures. And this preserves a little bit of the family history. We did something with my mom for her 90th. We put together 100 pages, almost 100 pages of family history. And we did it because I kind of actually started with her. She said to her 4 kids, I have 3 siblings, there's 4 of us. She said to us that she wanted to make sure that the family, the children and the grandchildren and the ones after them, that they know what God did in our family. So she said, I want you to write your memories of growing up in the Lloyd Aylestock family, and I want you to know what you have contributed and what you can be remembered for. So we started writing, and my siblings sent me their text, and I put the booklet together, and it has pictures in it, but it's really mostly text. And we're telling stories about what it was like growing up in that family. Now we did it because Mom wanted my daughter and my granddaughter and grandsons to know what God did in the family. She wanted to pass that heritage on. And I'm glad that she was thinking that way, because this is what lit a fire under us to prepare a history for our family to give to our children and grandchildren and soon great-grandchildren. We can share with them what the events are of history that we lived through. You know, kids are graduating from high school today that they weren't alive when 9/11 happened. It's amazing, isn't it? They're studying it as history. It was current events for us. We lived through it. We need to share some of our experiences with our grandkids, what life was like and what God taught us when we lived that. On the 60th anniversary of D-Day, the Aylestock family, my grandmother and all of her children, they all got together, and they did it every year. My dad was one of 15 children, so it was a big family reunion, always a big family reunion. They got together, and they did it every single year, and they were celebrating that year the 60th anniversary of the Aylestock family reunion, and it was the 60th anniversary of D-Day. And then I found out that year, the reason it's the 60th anniversary of the Aylestock family reunion is when the war was over and all the Aylestock brothers came home, all the family got together to meet the guys that survived the war. And 5 of them were in the war. 4 at one time. 2 or 3 of them took part on D-Day, actually hit the beaches. And they survived it, which is a miracle. And they got, when the war was over, they came home. You know what they did? They got married. They got jobs. They had kids, and they moved on with their life. I didn't even know that they were involved in D-Day. And on the 60th anniversary, the other siblings got the brothers talking about D-Day and what happened. And we sat there with rapt attention. We needed to know this. And then I can take what I heard and I can share it with my family. Our kids and our grandkids need to know some of the history that our family has lived through. We provide, as grandparents, a family history. 3, we provide a second opinion. A second opinion. We can provide our grandkids another perspective during those times that they are questioning their parents. You know, we can be supportive of them. This is a supportive role. We're never to undermine our children in the parenting of our grandchildren. We're not there to undermine them. We're there to support them. Our grandkids love when I get when we get together and I tell them funny stories about Jamie, man, they will. Sometimes they ask, like they did in August, sitting around the table, Dad or Papa, would you tell us about Mommy and the peas? And so I told them the story again about Mommy having to learn to like her peas and what all happened that day. And, of course, I made it funny, and I animated it, and the kids just laughed, and they loved it. And I get to the end of it, well, tell us again. And they want to hear the whole thing again. It's giving, and then I can tell them in this, now your mother had to learn a lesson that was very important. And then I can use that as a teaching time to teach the grandkids to support what Jamie and Trevor are doing in their life. We give a second opinion, and we help our children parent our grandchildren. I can say to Brooklyn, you are just like your mother. And then I can tell her something positive about her mother that I see in her. And that supports her mother. And that makes Brooklyn feel good. It gives her a sense of belonging. She belongs in this family. 4, we can provide parental perspective. We can help our grandchildren see that their parents are reasonable people, and they're good people, and they're not from another planet in the universe. Also, if our grandchildren are feeling down, they don't feel like they measure up, they failed on something, I can say to them, let me tell you something about your mother. And I can let them know where she, or where I, or where Gigi failed at something and we got back up. That helps our grandchildren. It provides a perspective for them that's important for them to have. 5, we can provide life's little extras. We may have a little extra financial resources to be a blessing to our grandkids. Maybe a little extra time. Susan and I, we budget money to help our grandchildren with some of the expenses that they incur. And I'm thinking of probably Christian education right now. Some of that's being taken care of, but we're saving money to help them. We can be a blessing like that and give some of life's extras. When Brooklyn was born, she's our first grandchild. When she was born, Tom Farrell said to my wife and I, well, get ready to empty your pockets. I understand what he meant by that. Good grandparenting, like good skippering, just doesn't happen. We have to be purposeful in this role. We have a powerful role in the lives of our grandkids that involves love and hugs and fun and play and storytelling and time. And when mom and dad are busy with trying to make life work, we can fill a void at times and reinforce through the training that they're doing in the lives of our grandkids. Our grandkids need good and godly grandparents. They need us to be that way. They need our help in this. What they don't need is grandparents to grow old and cranky and grumpy. Grumpy old men and women who don't want the grandkids around. No, that's not what they need. They need the opposite of that. The longer we are skippering, the more skilled we should be becoming. Gap men, gap women, which demonstrate God's good and acceptable and perfect will. We are to be good and careful and helpful with them, to assist. We need our walk with Christ to be vibrant, well-ordered, and tight. Now, did you know what happens in sailing when things on board a ship are not tight? God refers to this in Isaiah. When things aren't tightened down. You ever heard the phrase, batten down the hatches? Yeah, sailing term. A phrase, sailing phrase. Close those hatches, lock them down, because the seas are rough. Batten down the hatches means better be prepared for some trouble. Storm is brewing. Have you heard this? Oh, but he's just a loose cannon. Sailing phrase. Cannons were rolled up to the side of the ship, the hole in the side, the barrel came out. They fired a broadside, and they would rope the cannon to the side of the inside of the boat, but on the recoil and the cannon kicked back, they would then have to roll it back in place. The ropes held it from just being loose and rolling all over the deck. And if a rope broke and you had a loose cannon that weighed, I don't know, a ton, thousands of pounds or hundreds of pounds rolling around, it could kill somebody, it could damage the ship. A loose cannon is somebody that's just a dangerous person. You don't know what's going to happen. Things need to be tightened down. We need to keep our lives spiritually ordered, tight, so that we aren't a spiritual shipwreck. If we shipwreck, folks, we can destroy our grandkids. We could. That influence can have effects for the rest of their life if we shipwreck. Isaiah 33 says this, "For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king, he will save us." Then he says, "Thy tacklings are loosed, they could not well strengthen their mast, they could not spread the sail." Now in this passage in Isaiah God is talking to Isaiah about Israel. Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is our lawgiver. The Lord is our king. He will save us. Us. The next verse, thy tacklings are loosed. Now he's talking about Israel's enemies. Israel has God. And when they have God and they're committed to God, they are safe. They're tight with God. But to the enemy, and in the book of Isaiah, Israel's enemy was Assyria. He is talking about the Assyrians. And he says of the Assyrians, that thy tacklings are loosed. They could not well strengthen their mast, the mast of a ship. They could not spread the sail. Assyria is like a shipwreck waiting to happen. But Israel, you're safe. You're secure in God. And when I think of grandparenting, we really need to be tight and careful and have a multi-generational focus. They need us. I didn't realize how important ropes were. Now, I read the passage about the tacklings and the mast and the sails. It's all controlled by ropes. In fact, the average ship in the age of sail had miles of ropes on board. The whole ship was controlled by ropes. The rudder, the wheel, the mast, the sails, everything was controlled by ropes. And they needed a sailor that was an expert in ropes. In fact, he had to know the ropes. You ever hear that phrase? Know the ropes? This goes back to the age of sail, and the sailor had to know that it was vital to a ship. Now I was watching a TV mini drama series on John Adams several years ago, and I saw a scene in there, and it didn't mean as much to me then as what it does now. Do we have that? Can we play this? The audio isn't so important. You can't hardly see it. What I wanted you to see are the ropes. The ropes. This is Boston in colonial days. It was a seaport town. The ropes, they're making ropes. That's supposed to be John Adams there. There they are, making